Is the youth meaningfully participating in the democratic project? Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Aldrin Simpier, standing in for Bongani Pingwa. Historically, young people and injustice just don't mix. Robert Sobukwe, Thabo Mbeki, Tsietsi Mashinini and many other struggle heroes were youngsters when they conceived the dream of a free South Africa. The youth of 1976 forced the government to abandon its plan for black students to be taught in Afrikaans. During 2015 and 2016, students' protected battle for free higher education reached its climax, eventually leading to the exemption of poor families from paying fees. Yet, over the years, our legislature and other key decision-making structures have been dominated and led by older people. While this year we saw a 5% increase in young people heading to Parliament, some believe the appointments are just cosmetic. Leading us to our poll question for tonight. Are young voices taken seriously in democratic South Africa? Choose from 3 colors. You can go and choose the yes if you agree, maybe, which is yellow, and red, which is no. Interact with our poll topic on Facebook and Twitter. Remember to use the hashtag SABCDG25 and hashtag SABC News. Or send us your WhatsApp videos to 065-862-4548. Our producer Lindiwe Mabena looks into why young voices of young people can't and shouldn't be ignored.
Inexperienced, unreliable, and apathetic are some words that generally spring to mind when one thinks about young people. But history shows that they are actually catalysts for social and political change. From the generation of anti-apartheid activists to that of the Fees Must Fall movement, young people continue to influence policies, raising their voices against injustice. While there weren't many of them appointed as lawmakers in previous administrations, this year saw a record number of young people going to Parliament. But does this mean young voices are finally being taken seriously?
There's definitely an understanding, at least on the part of government, that just based on numbers, young people are extremely important in this country, right? So just that age category is the majority in this country. So there's that understanding. But the way that translates into practice, we don't really see it as being as meaningful and impactful and thought out as it could be. And so you'll often find government will bring in 5 young people and propel them forward and say, look, we're doing all of this for young people, but you've created tokens out of a few people, and that doesn't mean anything for the rest of us.
Pillay works for a youth policy think tank called the Youth Lab. The organization trains young people to use democratic tools at their disposal to hold those in public office to account. They also help them create community development projects. Pillay says the inclusion of young people in decision-making processes should be done in a meaningful way, and they should be given the benefit of doubt.
Young people might not have years and years of experience drafting government policies, but we have all of this experience of being young, and that has to be valued, right, in ways that are actually prioritizing young people and in ways that say, if you speak, I'm going to listen to you. And I think one of the biggest examples where we've gotten it wrong is around these elections, right? So the IEC did big pushes towards crafting their whole campaign around getting young people to vote. But when young people came out and said, we're not voting for these reasons, or these are the questions we have about our democracy, it was shut down. And so when questions are asked, when discussions are needed to be had, young people are pushed aside and said, no, you're too angry, or you're too radical, or you're asking the wrong questions, or you're ungrateful. And it isolates you from the process.
Karabo Nguyuza is another young South African who is doing her bit to help solve some of the country's pressing issues. The 29-year-old owns a guest house in Tembisa in Ekurhuleni. Like Pillay, Guyuza says genuine inclusion of young people is not just about having the connected few at the table, but also supporting the work the youth does.
The future belongs to us. We are the future leaders, we are the future presidents. Therefore, we should be given opportunities now. When we want to try something, we want them to come on board and to at least help us or assist us or give us the tools and the equipment that we need.
Despite the changes this generation of young people have spearheaded over the past 25 years, some, however, believe there's a vacuum for youth activism in the country. Lindy Mapena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, so joining me in the conversation in studio here with me today is Kanye Bonani, as well as youth activist Kabelo Matlobohwane, to have a conversation around the young people and the democratic project. Let me start with you, Kabelo. Is it fair to say that young people are absent from the democratic project?
You know, what is the reality is that young people in the country, you know, in Sepedi you have something called Khomeamoshate. When young people are absent from politics, who do not vote and all that, they are still called names. But young people, again, when they come into the politics and play their role, they are frustrated because they are ignored. And then when that ignorance takes its course, they are frustrated, they go to protest, they're on the streets, they are called violent. So the problem is the system of politics in our country, and actually the world as a whole, whereby it refuses to transform in order to accommodate the youth voice, of which is the future of leadership and of everything of this world.
Yeah. But Kanye, isn't it true then to say that even if, for instance, a young person doesn't join a political party, they are part of the 6 million who decided not to participate in this year's general elections, that in itself is a political statement?
It's a huge political statement, because what we need to remember is that this is an act of showing that democracy in their eyes doesn't work. And it's an act of showing that from a structural point of view, there aren't enough transitional points. And we talk about politics, but remember, let's not reduce youth to just sort of these recreational figures that are these bodies that have to now enter when it comes to the voting booth. The fact that 6 out of the 9 million didn't vote, and the large majority of them are your first-time voters, the 18 to 19 gap, is a huge red flag. Because now we need to consider things like, okay, is the system that now has basic education formalized, has it given them enough understanding of what the vote means as an economic being, as a social being, not just as a political being? A lot of the structural issues speak to how young people are now putting socioeconomic issues ahead of the vote. Being able to find a job is more important than voting.
Than actually going out on poll day. Do you agree with that?
I disagree highly. When you abstain from voting, you maintain the system, the status quo. When you abstain from voting, you give the same government that has failed you the power to continue failing you.
How so?
When you abstain from voting, remember now, you have a government that is failing to produce jobs. And instead of you voting for a government that will produce jobs, or joining an organization that will produce jobs that you have hope in, you leave the very same government to continue failing.
Isn't that because of that apathy that we have been voting? It's been 25 years of democracy, but we have an unemployment rate that is standing at 29%, and in the majority it is the young people who are suffering.
Why don't you consider change of policy? If capitalism is not working, look for other systems of government.
Where do you
if neoliberalism is not working, look for other systems. That's why there's multi-party democracy in South Africa, so that it caters for these different systems. So that if this one fails and you feel that it has failed, you are able to go to the alternative. That's why there's opposition.
Kabelo, the ability to influence even ideology for that matter, at which point do you start as a young person?
I mean, so as much as there's a typical political route, what we're finding right now is that when you enter either a student command or a youth league, there are also other politics and glass ceilings that take place, especially if you're a black female. I mean, I think one of the things we need to remember about how we influence and how we sort of navigate policy perspective is not by holding on to the fact that we are young. We have to also find other ways of showing and assessing what the competency level and the influence, where does that come from? So as much as we see young cabinet ministers, we are seeing young MPs coming into parliament, we need to also find ways and means outside of those big national structures to affect change. I don't think that policy is the only way about doing that. And I think young people have shown on the ground, especially through civil society, how they are active change makers. But unfortunately, because the government narrative speaks to, especially when we think about Youth Day, how it's the narrative of we are only activists for a specific generation, for a specific mandate. We're not speaking about how actively and how in contemporary South Africa, Youth Day is highlighting and profiling how young people are making transitions, interventions, and creating impact in policy.
Okay, we'll continue this conversation and the debate just after this break, because what's important for me is that it's not only about influencing policy, but it's also about influencing society, and it's also about influencing what happens in the private sector. Just after this. Welcome back. It's all about you here on Democracy Gauge. The People's View allows you to interact with us, candidly so. Let's find out what you had to say on the streets of Johannesburg.
If a young person come up with an idea, it's more likely saying they don't have an experience, they don't know what they're talking about. It's always that case. It's not the case of saying, okay, let's give these young people a chance. Let's hear what they have to say.
In Parliament, there's a lot of old people in Parliament. They don't understand what we need. Even when we talk to them, they don't put those ideas into, they don't implement them the way we want them to be implemented. So it's really important for the government to listen to the youth.
Also, if you listen to us, we can be part of the Parliament and take out all of those old members. Therefore, South Africa can be changed in so many ways, because we can come up with new things. We are in the 21st century, for God's sake.
At the moment, I don't think that we are where we need to be as young people being heard. So I feel like we need to improve on that area.
If we can look into what is happening, if it can either be a political landscape of the country, the economy. Most of the young people are still bit unemployed, and in most cases when they try to come with ideas of trying to change the future, they'll not be given enough chance. I think we're not being listened to.
I think it is because there are many opportunities now for black people. We see a lot of young black people being appointed in positions. There's stuff like NSFAS that is allowing people to get education to better their lives and become better. We've also seen the government promoting people to go into TVET colleges. So if you don't enter university, it's not the end for you. You can go into a TVET college.
There is certain parts I can say the government is doing very well, looking at education, your NSFAS and everything, which is doing its utmost best to make sure that students are getting free education. And I commend the government for that. But as well as employment rate is something that is really, really a need to reduce crime, as well as making sure that we are a relevant nation.
And we continue our conversation with independent political analyst Khanya Bonani, as well as youth activist Kabelo Mahlokobane, who's joining me here in studio. Just starting off from where the lady who just spoke now, is it fair to say when we gauge the successes of young people in South Africa, we should do that through the lens of black people, young black people in South Africa, and that will give us an indication of where the youth in this country is at? Let's start with you, Khanya.
Oh, it's a tough one, because you could say yes, you could argue for yes and say, look, we see Nompendulo in Parliament, we see so many other young faces, not just in sort of the public government sector, but also in private sector. But remember, we're also transitioning past the sort of first generation of black to ever do it, right? So it's not a good yardstick for us, because for quite a lot of young people that are in these different pockets of society, they may have experienced a different understanding of what it means to be young and successful and black, right? So we could say this first generation of black professionals went on and did so many things and are revered by their generation. But for the younger generation, because they've had picked up the mannerisms of white corporate society and the system itself, regardless of whether it's a political, economic system, for young people... Is that
a simulation?
To some extent, yes.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about that, because this was sort of broad-stroke the first 10 years of democracy. But at year 25, where we see young people, more and more black young people entering the senior positions, entering these posts of visibility, it's going to be important for us to look at re-navigating and rewiring it from first black to representative beyond just color of the skin,
Inclusive.
beyond, yes, inclusive. So beyond age, beyond gender, beyond sexuality, we need to be able to show that visibility and be able to be consistent in the messaging.
Kabelo, do you get the sense that in order to be seen to have succeeded, that there is an expectation for young black professionals especially to assimilate?
You know, we actually have to speak about young black women. Maybe it's because me, I'm on the street. We'll speak about policy, we'll massage those things, but for me, I want to see change happening really for the ordinary people. So for
but
me,
who are the
black
ordinary
people? Are
people?
black people. It's not even history, must not even massage that. Black people were marginalized, were dispossessed, were abused by the apartheid regime. And for us to be able to correct that and move forward, and to say that South Africa has moved to the right path, we need to see this group of the formerly, actually still marginalized even today, coming into the economic play, coming into positions of government, coming in and playing a role in the general governance of the country. Not a place whereby even a minister now is a pensioner. You know, in our own tradition, when you are a pensioner, you are a gogo, and then we expect that you must go and retire, stay at home with your grandchildren. But according to government, that's when you get promoted to positions.
It's so interesting that you should raise this point, because the president announced yesterday that former ministers Jeff Radebe and Derek Hanokoma now part of a special envoy. And the conversation then became about a conversation around ageism. And some people believe and feel that the president should rather go for young people. And on the other end, some are saying that, but you can't let go of institutional memory.
Look, well, I agree, there must be a generational mix. But we must remember that this future that we are building is for young people. The older people are exiting now, so to say that, but young people are the ones that are going to have to live with these consequences. So they need to be there involved in the majority so that they are able to hold themselves accountable for their own future.
Agenda 2063. Quick one. Quick one. NYDA. Your assessment of NYDA and any other youth structure that is out there that are seen to be or established to be organizations that must fulfill the mandate of the young person.
Okay, so I'm going to deal with NYDA last because, yeah, it's a very long story. I think we should first deal with YES. YES has been this sort of piloted, pulled together private sector, well, they're non-profit in behavior and character. But we know that quite a heavy component of that public-private partnership is private. So one of the things I need to sort of put out there, I think, is that as much as YES is the foremost structure to deal with young people and unemployment, there has to be an opening or at least a door ajar to allow for young people to not just be able to do the policy inputs, but also to see the changes that are taking place from the employment numbers.
Okay, quickly need you to go to NYDA.
But NYDA, to be quite honest, we'll only know whether NYDA is really for young people or not in the review of the National Youth Policy, which they're undertaking until June. The problem with NYDA is that we see them in specific pockets, but we don't see a cohesive mandate that is pushing government departments to actually ensure that youth mainstreaming takes place, gender mainstreaming takes place. So we need to put more pressure on the NYDA to actually do what it's meant to do.
Kabelo, your take on the NYDA?
NYDA, it's not even there. It doesn't exist. There's its own narrow mandate that it's serving there. It's not for the interest of young people in South Africa, and I don't even recognize it.
Is it strange that when we speak about youth, the conversation around the NYDA only happens around about June?
Well, for me, like I said, even like people that come to me, people that I've engaged with, no one even speaks about NYDA.
Should we have a youth ministry, do you think, perhaps?
Definitely, that's what is going to work. That's
Youth
what is
ministry?
important.
Yes, no?
NYDA is just there for interests of whoever knows what they're going to benefit there. But young people, it's been there for how many years? And how many young people can attest now that they benefited from NYDA?
Yes, no?
Besides having
Youth
membership?
ministry? Yes, no? I need a yes, no.
It would be a no, because
it will be a no. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'm so sorry. But you can continue the conversation on social media. So after the break, we look at one of the historic events that followed the country's first democratic poll. Stay with us. Welcome back. This week in 1994, Parliament adopted the Restitution of Land Act, which paved the way for South Africans who were forcibly removed from land since 1913 to seek redress. The IFP and the Freedom Front Plus had voted against the move.
Good evening. Those stories coming up. But first we go to Parliament, where the most important law since the elections has been passed.
And it has to do with land. The Restitution of Land Rights Bill became law today by 212 votes to 26, with the IFP and the Freedom Front opposing the measure. Conrad Burke reports.
This law is about the land and the millions of people who lost the land. It undoes the 1913 Natives Land Act, a law which became the cornerstone of segregation. It also, for the first time, makes it possible for courts to compensate people who lost their land because of racial laws.
Ordinary people, Mr. Speaker, in cities and the countryside are waiting impatiently for the results of the legislation before you. The hopes and aspirations of millions of South Africans are represented in this House.
The National Party supports this bill before the House, sir, because it adheres to Section 121 to 123 of the Constitution for Transition negotiated at the World Trade Center.
The fatal flaws in the bill stem from the 1993 Constitution, which in Section 121 stipulates that no claims prior to June 1913 can be entertained.
Before we say goodbye, let's take a look at the results for today's poll. And remember, the question was, are young voices taken seriously in democratic South Africa? Those who said yes, that is the green, the percentage, 7%. Those who said maybe, which is the yellow over here, percentage there is at 9%, and an overwhelming 84% said no, and that is the red. So, wow. Will those voices ever be taken seriously? Thank you so much for watching. From me, Alden Sampier, and the team, good night.